Now down in Psalm 110 verse 5, we find a reverse position. We find that Yahweh is at the right hand of the Messiah. Is that possible? Well, of course. It's a reverse image. And there are a number of passages, Psalm 121 verse 5, and Psalm 109 31, at the very end of the preceding psalm, you find this other image, that you can have Yahweh at your right hand. In this case, the Messiah is going to be emboldened and empowered by having Yahweh work for him on his right hand. That's a reverse image from verse 1, where the Messiah, Adoni, not Adonai, is sitting at the right hand of the Father. Now, unfortunately, Strong's Concordance will not show you that precious distinction between Adonai and Adoni. You'll have to look it up for yourself and read the Hebrew, possibly check a good commentary. But you see, this creed is so straightforward. Yahweh and the man Messiah. That's exactly what Paul comes to in 1 Timothy 2:5. There's one God, that's the Father, 1,300 times in the New Testament, the Father. And one mediator between that one God and man, the man Messiah. That's exactly Psalm 110 verse 1, which is a controlling verse for the whole of the New Testament. What is so brilliant about our theologian Jesus, and we're to call him Rabbi and Lord according to John 13:13, is that having recited the Shema, affirmed the Unitarian creed of Israel, his heritage, in complete and total agreement with a Jew. That proves, of course, that Jesus wasn't a Trinitarian. That's impossible. The Trinity is totally un-Jewish in concept. Jesus was a Unitarian, saying that the most important idea is that God is one single Lord. Yahweh Echad, one single Lord. But scholars have been so shy of telling us what that second Lord is. They even misquote it and have the gall to say the second Lord there is Adonai, meaning God. No, it's Adoni, the non-deity title. All 195 times that that little word Adoni occurs, the hirek underneath, the vowel underneath the nun there in the Hebrew. Ask any Jew, look it up yourself, is fundamentally significant for Christology. So this brings us back then to Dorner, the famous Christologist who wrote at length, the German who wrote at length on the Trinity. He winds up with a very interesting comment on one of the serious defects of Trinitarianism. How shall we determine, he says, the nature of the distinction between the God who became man and the God who did not become man? That's an interesting thing to say. You've got a God in Trinitarianism who did not become man, and another God who did. You've got one God in heaven, one on the earth. That sounds awfully like two gods. So ask your friends, how many Yahwehs are you proposing? And they'll probably say one. Fine, you say. That's great. One Yahweh. That's what Jesus said. The Lord our God is one Yahweh. Yahweh our God is one Yahweh. But wait a minute. Aren't you saying that Jesus is Yahweh and the Father is Yahweh? Most of your Trinitarian friends will say that. The Father is Yahweh. But you're saying also that Jesus is Yahweh. That's two. That's one too many. Now you can't then sort of weasel your way out of that and say, well, I'm talking about one essence. Now we've moved the whole conversation to a totally unbiblical sphere. Where in the world is God called an essence or a what? That's just nonsense. It's not fair to remove the conversation from biblical language to a post-biblical Greek philosophical language. Just not playing fair at all. That's a totally different thing. No, God is one Yahweh, and you can't have a God in heaven and a God on earth without talking of two who are Yahweh. Two gods. That's not right. We lose the manhood of Jesus totally there. We lose the fact that he's a man, not just man in some philosophical sense. The Trinity is really a problematic thing. Once you say Jesus is Yahweh, and you believe that the Father is Yahweh, you're talking about two Yahwehs. That will not work. You cannot say three X's or two X's is one X. So you must either decide to call the triune God totally as one Yahweh. You cannot then call each one of the three individually Yahweh. That amounts to three X's, and one X being the same thing. That's sheer contradiction. What we must avoid then is the apparent nonsense of the Athanasian Creed, that the Father is Almighty, the Son is Almighty, the Holy Spirit is Almighty, but that's not three Almighties. Well, pardon me, it is. In the language that we share in common, if that's a chair, that's a chair, and that's a chair, that's three chairs. What is the point of frying our brains with these brain-breakingly difficult propositions that nobody understands, nobody really preaches on, and yet if you question it, you're threatened with eternal hellfire? Isn't it time for us to return to Jesus, who is a Jew, reciting the creed? The Muslims are aghast at the notion of a Trinity. The Jews, who don't accept the Messiah has come, but it is, after all, their Bible. the creed that they preserve for humanity is the Unitarian Creed of Deuteronomy 6, recited and affirmed by Jesus wholeheartedly. They preserved all of this for us, and now we have the gall to affront them with the nonsensical idea that God is really three, and that the word echad, that every Jew knows what echad means, is really plural or complex. I think we have to put a stop to this language nonsense, because people tend to believe when they hear these complicated things